New York City, 1895. It was infested in poverty, crime, and unsanitary conditions, with very wealthy residents and 2 blocks down, poverty-stricken Lower Manhattan. The police force was still developing after being founded about 50 years ago. It was hardworking, just, and freed the city of criminals for the time being. But the successors of William Havemeyer, who was the founder of the New York Police Department, had become corrupt. Criminals roamed the streets, stealing the needy's every last penny, and even bribing officers not to catch them. The police force was now almost useless. There was a need for help, and fast.
That is where 37-year-old Theodore Roosevelt comes in. Theodore Roosevelt came in as the new police commissioner to root out corruption in the officers and clean up the streets of New York. He strived forward to make sure that corruption in his own officers was obliterated. Roosevelt once lived in New York as a child. As he was born rich, he did not know anything about the poverty of Lower Manhattan. Roosevelt had attended Harvard University. He also had asthma, and doctors thought he wouldn't live long, which is why he and his family took trips out of the big city. This also created his love of nature. He had been given a gun that he would hunt animals with. He would study the animals that he hunted. His father died in 1878. He thought he would never be happy again, but then he met a Boston woman named Alice Hathaway Lee. He fell in love and soon married her. Shortly after giving birth to their first son, Kermit, his mother and wife died on the same day. He was heartbroken. Later, in 1886, he married Edith Carroll, a childhood friend. After he ended his volunteer regiment in the Spanish-American War, he was going to run for governor of New York, but his wife convinced him out of it. Seeing Roosevelt was unhappy, Henry Cabot Lodge convinced him to accept the job for the New York Police Department.
Then on May 6, 1895, he moved to New York City to begin his work. As he arrived, he brought in the usual expectations of any good leader, only to hire and promote loyal officers who did whatever they could to stop criminals and strive forward to help solve the poverty of Lower Manhattan and make New York a safer place. Before officers bribed the commissioners to hire and promote them. In the summer of 1895, Roosevelt met Jacob Riis. Riis was a well-known photographer. Theodore and Jacob would go on midnight tours and see the insanitation and poverty of New York. Since Roosevelt had grown up wealthy, he had not experienced the very poor areas of New York City. Jacob Riis helped show Teddy the real problems of New York. Theodore, the newly elected commissioner, said, "This job is a higher authority than it looks." As Roosevelt scoured the streets of Manhattan, his understanding of society evolved. He began to realize that a good spirit would not solve the problem that the Lower East Side of Manhattan was being faced with. He thought to himself, government would need to monitor and make sure that the condition of the Lower East Side of Manhattan did not happen anywhere else. Corruption began a few years after the start of the force. Since officers could only have 1-year terms, people were fighting each other to get next year's spot. Police collected fees for serving warrants, holding back suspects, and appearing in court. Detectives received rewards for reclaiming stolen property, and the police gave special services to citizens and businesses. The difference between actual justice and stopping crime above all, or just doing it for the money, had become very blurry. About a month after Roosevelt had started, the New York Times published a newspaper with the headline, "Police Caught Napping," which refers to Roosevelt's efforts to reform the police force. When Teddy caught his officers sleeping, socializing, or just not attending their post, he would march them up to his office for a formal reprimand. Roosevelt would replace their spot with an officer that was willing to serve his city. He would immediately enforce his guidelines on his newly hired officers. Teddy was beginning to learn that the city's officers were primarily Catholics. Therefore, they wouldn't work on Sundays. That was the Catholics' day of resting. To solve that problem, Roosevelt decided to increase the amount of Jewish officers
that there were in the police force. The Jews did not rest on Sundays, so now the city is being patrolled all week, instead of 6 out of 7 days of the week. However, the larger German population was not happy. Germans had always disliked the Jews, and now the Germans disliked the police force due to it gaining more Jewish officers. Some of the people believe that this may have contributed to his loss in the fall of the 1895 citywide elections, along with some other things.
One of the other things that contributed to his loss in the elections was his closing of saloons, which generally operated on Sundays in defiance of local law. This act angered many Germans as they considered doing this an important facet of life.
Then in 1896, New York hit a major heat wave. Nearly 1,500 people died during that 10-day crisis. Roosevelt, already with his popularity going down, went to force some areas to hand out ice. After the ice had been distributed, Roosevelt went to tour the back alleys of Lower East Side Manhattan. Teddy witnessed firsthand the fathers breaking off chunks of ice and giving it to his children to suck on. Roosevelt was beginning to take back some credibility through his efforts in the heat wave.
While Roosevelt was with the police force, he began to develop a special relationship with the Jews. He encouraged the Jews to work for the police force and praised them for their efforts. In return, the Jews printed Yiddish flyers for Roosevelt's gubernatorial campaign for the Rough Riders. His Rough Riders force had many Jews in it.
But some people hated Roosevelt for encouraging and allowing Jews to join the police force. An anti-Jewish German man named Dr. Hermann Alwart, who was a journalist, started an anti-Jewish crusade. He had come to America just to start the anti-Jewish crusade. Alwart came to New York and asked for police protection for one of his meetings. Roosevelt said to his police force, "Select 30 good, trusty, intelligent Jewish members of the force, men whose faces clearly show their race, and order them to report to me." Theodore assigned 30 Jewish officers to protect the meeting. This meeting did not involve any anti-Jewish comments because of Roosevelt's move. This, of course, was Roosevelt's plan, so there would be no violence that Dr. Alwart could create at this meeting. Along with his major effects to New York City, Roosevelt had some minor but effective changes to the police force. He made sure that every station had a telephone so the stations could communicate back and forth. Roosevelt also decided to make the style of transportation different. The police force had previously used horses. Horses were good because the officers used little energy to go through the big city of Manhattan. On the other hand, the horses were big, uncontrollable, and could not move fast through the crowded cities of New York. They were impractical for city usage. Instead, Roosevelt had the officers travel on bikes. The bikes were smaller and you could navigate through the city easier. The negative of the bikes is that the officers used their own energy to move the bike around.
Before Roosevelt came, New York had been a place full of poverty and crime.
Nevertheless, Theodore Roosevelt had come in as the new police commissioner to root out corruption in his own officers and to clean up the streets of New York. He had strived forward to clean up this mess of crime and poverty in Manhattan and had set an example for future commissioners that would follow him.
Then, Theodore Roosevelt retired from his job as the New York Police Department Commissioner in 1897 and took Assistant Secretary of the Navy instead. Still, Theodore Roosevelt made a lasting impact on the New York Police Department. He showed that hard work, dedication, and smart thinking can lead to a successful and safe city. Although his impact may have not seemed that great during his run as commissioner, his impact on the New York Police Department lives on today. Today, people see his accomplishments as a great success to New York and the world.